Welcome to The Real Tea. I'm your host, Tammy Murphy, broker owner of RH2L, bringing Miami Valley real homes to love.
And I'm Ellie Sollenberger to give my perspective as a home buyer.
We're going to give you the key to Miami Valley real estate.
All right, we're back.
Okay, so I think there's been a time where you've surprised me with something, so I'm gonna do what is that? Turnabout's fair play,
Right.
So we kind of talked before about when we were out showing houses and all the stuff going on in the market and everything like that. We talked about real estate and realtors and what their job is and how it works.
Yes.
And you know a lot of realtors in the business and
Right.
family and all that kind of stuff. So this is like a part of who you are where you understand maybe a lot more than nobody that has not had any experience in it. And remember, there was the lawsuit that's going on, and it's been like all this negativity and everything about people overpaying for their real estate commissions, and so there's just this whole thing that's going on. Well, they settled it today.
Oh, okay.
So it's not finalized. It still has to be approved by the courts. But I wanted to surprise you and get your take on this. So you can see here some of the information, and if you want to read it out or whatever,
So it says NAR agreed to abandon longstanding industry rules that have required most home sale listings to include an upfront offer telling buyers agents how much they will get paid.
yeah.
So what does that mean?
So, when we started the process, when I'm working with you as the buyer, there's a set of buyer documents that you and Mike signed.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the ability for me to represent you. That buyer broker agency indicates that this is how I'm going to work for you and what I'm going to do and how I get paid.
Yeah.
And in the current way is that our sellers typically offer coverage for the commission to be paid to the buyer's agent. I'm being paid for by the seller's proceeds from the sale of the property for the buyer representation. So I work for you, but they get to pay it through the sale proceeds of the house. That's how it's been for 116 years. Why does that work, or why has it worked? It's because, obviously, it's not out of pocket up front from the buyer. It's stated in the listing agreement that this is being compensated fairly for the buyer's agent to be taken care of. And it allows for me to know as the agent, this is what I am going to be compensated on. Now, in that buyer broker agreement, it also says that if you decide to buy a for sale by owner or a sheriff's auction or some other form where there isn't compensation offered by the seller, then you and I are going to negotiate and we're going to come to terms as to how I get paid.
Okay.
But you never had to worry about how I was going to get paid because you knew it was taken care of by the houses that we were showing through the MLS.
Okay.
Well, that's not going to happen anymore per this agreement.
So sellers have typically set buyers agent fees. Consumer advocates say the arrangement has prevented buyers from negotiating to save money. NAR has said the current model helps buyers benefit from an agent's advice even if they can't afford to pay an agent out of pocket.
So, in your situation, if you had to say, well, I'm going to buy the house for, let's call it $200,000, but I'm going to use my realtor services, now we have to negotiate that. So I'm not sure how many houses we're going to see. I'm also not sure how many hours it's going to take for us to find the one in order to get you into it.
Right.
So either I'm going to figure out an hourly rate or I'm going to charge per thing that I do. It now becomes complicated in my opinion, which is only my opinion. Obviously, it's not what has been found in this judgment. But you as the consumer are now going to have to negotiate with your realtor, otherwise how that compensation is going to get taken care of.
So it says in the settlement they would no longer include upfront offers to buyers agents starting in mid-July, and buyers would be able to negotiate compensation upfront with their agents.
Right. So the interesting thing here is, and we're going to have a lender who is going to come in and maybe talk about this, but maybe not. It can't be rolled into the cost of your loan. Oh. So here's my concern, and this is the reason why, I obviously advocate for my clients, is to make sure that someone has the ability to be represented. They're not forced into not being represented.
Yeah.
Because now if and I've had people who decide not to do an inspection because they really just didn't have the extra $500 to pay out of pocket at the time of the inspection. Now we're saying you've got to pay for your representation outside of pocket, outside of the closing itself, or at the closing, but out of your pocket. It can't be rolled into your home loan, which you wouldn't want to do anyway, but it seems to be, and of course this is going to be figured out in the court system and everything. If it's determined that this is the new way, you're going to see a shift and a change in how real estate has been done. Can you imagine that every time I was taking you out, I'm charging you, let's go ahead and put a charge card reader in my car, I guess, but
Right.
Your perspective, was it nice knowing that it's taken care of and you're doing what you have to do?
Yeah, and I feel like we benefited when we were the buyers, but we paid for it when we were the sellers, so it all kind of equals out.
Right.
And I feel like going back to looking at houses, we wouldn't have seen the first house that we absolutely loved because by the pictures online, it didn't do it justice. So I'm not going to say you charge $100 per house you sell or you show. I'm not going to be like, let's go look at this one, and this one because it looks like a turd online and I'm not going to waste my $100.
Right. So I'm concerned, obviously, about this, not for just because of how it's going to affect my business. I've always conducted business where my buyers are signing a buyer agency agreement. They understand how my compensation is being taken care of.
Right.
I get that there have been some states where that's not a requirement and some brokerages that have not used that. I think they've done detriment to themselves and to their customers for not explaining that process well enough or throughout the time. However, we're all going to pay the price.
Yeah.
Ultimately, the consumers are going to pay the price. And that line where it says they may decide to not see houses that maybe really does fit their requirement because they might be paying per fee a charge, right?
Yeah.
The other side of that is if they start piecemealing it and you do an a la carte service, and I just had a deal with somebody who was using an a la carte service. I'm full service for my client because they are represented, right?
Yeah.
But the other side is only partially being represented. They're only being represented in this aspect. That is so difficult as another professional in this industry because you see the lag that somebody's not getting that assistance. They're not
Right.
getting the documentation. They're not knowing that the process. And it's going to, I think it's going to be a little bit of a learning curve for everybody at this point.
Well, it's going to be like if one side is like a for sale by owner and then the other side's represented by a buyer's agent, and then the owner wants, or the seller wants the buyer's agent to provide all the documents. No, sir. You decided to sell by owner. That means you assume those responsibilities of selling this home.
Well, and I've had that situation. So in a for sale by owner, the first conversation you have with the seller is, are they willing to compensate for your commission representing the buyer? In most cases, all they've done is cut their cost for being represented on the seller side.
Yeah.
Most of the time, they're still willing to cover this commission or offer a commission for the buyer's agent. But the process is that I'm going to protect you because I want to use these standard contracts. I don't want to use a contract that the seller has prepared or maybe their legal person has prepared. We're going to use standard forms, which I can use because I'm representing you and I'm a part of that association. So we're covered under that, right? Mm-hmm. But now the seller gets it. Well, what does this mean? What does this mean? I'm sorry, sir, but I don't represent you as the seller. If you have questions, you need to talk to your legal counsel or you need to get a realtor involved.
Yeah.
And that's the disconnect, right? That's the disconnect when you have somebody who's being represented and somebody who's choosing not to. And we've had that situation with for sale by owners. And now with this, I think we're going to have that more likely on the buyer's side, where the buyers are taking actions on their own and maybe not using the services, not getting representation, and ultimately having the potential for some issue.
Yeah. So do you think that it's going to become more competitive because you'll have the agents that are charging a la carte fees versus I'll show you whatever for free?
Yeah.
But I want to sell your house, or whatever agreement you come up with.
Right. And obviously that's the whole rationale behind this lawsuit, is that everybody, in the seller and the buyer, should both be able to negotiate what their costs are. Well, the buyer didn't have to negotiate it. They just knew that they were covered. Now the buyer has to negotiate it, and the agent has to provide that conversation up front. Because just like with the pre-approval letter, if you start showing houses to somebody and you didn't ask if they were pre-approved or you don't have verification of that, you're probably wasting your time.
Yeah.
I've always said, I'm not going to represent a buyer and not have right to represent already covered.
Yeah.
That's just for us to know that we're wanting to work together. Now we have to add the compensation level in there on this per these terms, and you have people who haven't been able to have the conversation when it was normal, and now it's not normal. And so it's just going to be a little bit of a learning curve, as well as a little bit of a sticky situation,
Yeah.
Lots of situations will come up, and we'll have more to talk about as this grows on.
Do you think that majority will continue to operate as they have and still put the buyer's commission in there?
Well, so we can't, per this agreement. So
it can't even be included at all?
So as the MLS of this multiple listing service, the whole benefit of that Realtor Association and the multiple listing service is the network that it creates. But it was the ability to know that when I show house 123, I know my compensation is X number. And that's sufficient for what I need to do for my client. And again, was I driven by that? No. If it met the needs of my client, we're going to go see the house. It's not driven by that compensation that's there, but the compensation is listed. Mm-hmm. So there's confidence that if we write an offer on this, I'm going to get paid. Now, I'm going to make the agreement with my client. My client's going to say, yeah, I'll pay you this. We get to the closing table, and now you find out you still owe me whatever. Let's say you owe me $2,000.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm sorry, Tammy. I just brought my down payment money. I just brought my closing costs. I didn't know I also had to pay you out of pocket. Well, you did, because we had this conversation.
Yeah.
And instead of paying it maybe out over the time while we were doing the different showings and the parts of the process, maybe we made the agreement that you're going to pay it at closing, because that's where typically you want to do it, right?
Right.
But now it's X factor in addition out of pocket. I just see that that's going to be an issue.
So before, where you guys really did only get paid at closing, now there's potential to make, like on the opposite side, commission, or not commission, but payment throughout the entire time.
Payment for services as they're rendered.
So do you really care if that house goes to close as much as you did before?
Correct. So do you think, as the consumer, that you actually lose a little bit of what that advocacy, professionalism was supposed to be there to make sure that the process itself and getting to the closing table is beneficial? Or does it become now a money grab that I'll just go show houses and I can make $100 each time I show a house? I don't care if they ever close.
Right.
I don't want to operate that way.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, that doesn't fit the best interest of the consumer. To me, it fits the best interest of the consumer if I'm committed throughout the process for making sure their needs are met, their best interests are served.
Mm-hmm.
And I do know that I believe strongly that we've had a fair and equitable way for this compensation to be handled before. It's unfortunate when somebody brings a lawsuit, and it doesn't mean that we've done anything wrong by now them settling this, but it does mean that we have to change the course of action. And if I thought that our consumers were really being hurt in it, then I would have obviously been on board from day one that we should be doing things differently. Mm-hmm. The problem is that it was the industry and potentially states or brokerages that weren't doing the best thing that they could be by explaining the process to the buyer in the beginning.
Yeah.
How they were being paid and compensated by using these forms that we use when we list with the seller and talk about how we're going to sell the house and what the price is and what that's going to include.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you have that same conversation with the buyer?
Yeah. And I do see it from, I guess, the plaintiff's part on this, where before you used to only go to your real estate agent to find out what was available, or you drove by, mm-hmm. or whatever. Now with like Zillow and Realtor.com and, other places, I'm able to see what is available like in real time as it's posted, instead of having access to the MLS.
Right.
So I understand that. However, I have always said any of my friends, families, coworkers, whatever, that wanted to list their house and they're going to sell it by themselves. And I'm like, a real estate agent will make up their compensation by you being able to charge that much more for that house.
Right.
And it will be better in the long run, and you will be better in the long run.
And that's actually supported by data that NAR collects over the years, that where the offer of compensation for realtor services is exceeded by what the value the realtor brings to the table. Just like the house that maybe was listed under market value, as your realtor, I'm going to make sure that we're listed at market value, just below maybe, but in that range.
Yeah.
Certainly not going to leave $80,000 on the table.
That's crazy.
And I'm going to make sure that when you're buying, that you're buying well enough in that market range that if 2 months, 2 years, 3, whatever it is, down the road you want and need to sell it, that you at least have equity value in there because we made the deal the right way when you bought it. Now that when you sell it, my compensation is also, again, more than covered for you.
Yeah. I also find it interesting that real estate agent commission is included on here, but what about the lender's commission?
Yeah. Not even discussed.
Yeah.
And you're not able to negotiate that.
Exactly. So why is it bad on this side, but they're literally doing the exact same thing, but that wasn't discussed at all?
Wasn't discussed. And, and that was the other part of it is, like I said, when we talk about the buyer coming out of pocket to pay this because it can't be rolled into the home loan, well, immediately, I believe the Mortgage Brokers Association was talking about, is there a way that we can allow commission to be rolled into the value of, or to the loan itself? And I don't want somebody to pay for my commission over 30 years. That doesn't make any sense. Or over 15 years, whatever they may be doing their loan term for. Mm-hmm. So that doesn't seem to make sense either for the consumer. So there is still a lot of variables in this that have to be ruled, figured out, determined, and best practice for people, because ultimately the process shouldn't hinder the consumer.
Yeah, exactly.
And I agree that if the consumer wants to be involved in this and have the ability to negotiate, which you always do, it's just now you're negotiating for different reasons.
And I think it is really a disservice to the home buyer, the first-time home buyer also, because they're not on that seller level, so it's not, one for one. But right now, the millennials already can't afford houses because of student loans and whatever else we've got going.
Right.
That now we have to come up with not only our down payment, not only closing costs, but now we have to come up with this commission.
Yeah. So still to be determined how this works out.
Yeah.
We'll keep our eyes on it, and I'm sure we'll have more conversations.
Yeah, definitely interesting.
Thanks.
Thanks for joining us today on the Realty Podcast. If you enjoyed the knowledge and entertainment today, please subscribe and share with your friends.